My name is Rose. And if I am being honest, my life once looked like the perfect picture of simplicity. I wasn't born rich, I wasn't born into luxury. But I had something far more precious. I had a family that loved me, a small home that felt warm, and dreams that were untouched by the cruelty of the world. Every morning, sunlight would filter through the thin curtains of my room, and I would wake up to the sound of my mother calling me for breakfast. It wasn't a royal dining table, no expensive food, no golden cutlery. Just a small wooden table, a cup of tea, and the laughter of my parents. That laughter was my comfort. That warmth was my wealth. Back then, I thought life would always remain like this. Peaceful, safe, ordinary yet beautiful. I never imagined that this simple happiness could one day disappear. In school, I wasn't the most popular girl, but I had friends who would share their snacks with me, who would walk home by my side, who would tell me secrets in hushed voices. And when I came home, my father would always ask, "How was your day, princess?" The way his tired face lit up when he saw me. That was my treasure. I didn't crave diamonds. I didn't dream of mansions. My heart only wanted these small pieces of happiness, because to me, they were everything. But life has its own way of changing stories. It does not knock on your door and ask permission before it takes away what you love. It comes like a storm, uninvited, unstoppable, unforgiving. And slowly, piece by piece, the happiness I thought would last forever began to fade away. And the truth is, life doesn't always stay kind. The same walls that once echoed with laughter slowly began to echo with silence. It started with small changes. My father coming home later than usual, his smile looking weaker, his eyes carrying a heaviness I didn't understand. At first, I thought maybe he was just tired. Maybe work was more stressful than before. But deep down, something told me. Something was slipping away. Then one evening, I remember sitting by the window, watching the rain paint trails on the glass, when I heard my parents whispering in the kitchen. Their voices were low, but in their tone, I could feel the weight of fear. Words like loans, debt, and "we will manage somehow" broke through the walls and reached me. That night, I realized for the first time that my safe little world was not unbreakable. Soon, the changes became impossible to ignore. My father lost his job. The man who once stood tall with pride now sat in silence for hours, staring at the floor as though searching for answers that never came. My mother, who once hummed songs while cooking, now worried over every single expense. I was too young to understand money, but old enough to feel the way it controlled everything. It changed the air in our home. It stole the laughter from our mornings. It made the nights longer, colder, heavier. And slowly, the world outside began to notice too. Relatives who once visited with smiles now came with judgment in their eyes. Neighbors whispered. Friends pulled away. And I started to see the cruel truth. When you have money, everyone stays close. But when you lose it, you lose people too. That was the first time in my life I felt truly scared. Not because of the dark outside my window, but because of the shadows that had entered my home, my family, my heart. And I never thought people could change so quickly. But they did. The very same friends who once laughed with me at school, who once promised me that nothing would come between us, suddenly started treating me differently. It was in the way their eyes shifted when I walked past, in the way their voices lowered when they whispered behind my back. They no longer invited me to sit with them. They no longer shared their snacks or secrets. It was as if I had become invisible. Or worse, unwanted. One afternoon, I overheard one of them say, "Why should we hang out with her? She's not rich anymore. She can't buy us things." Those words cut deeper than any knife could, because it was then I realized they had never truly been my friends. They were only there when my family's life looked comfortable. And the moment that comfort faded, so did their loyalty. But it wasn't just school. The cruelty followed me everywhere. Relatives who once praised me now avoided me as though poverty was a disease they might catch. Neighbors who once smiled now pitted us from a distance. Even the shopkeeper at the corner began to look at us differently, as if we were burdens instead of customers. It felt like the whole world had turned its back on me. And I asked myself again and again, why does money have the power to decide if someone deserves kindness? Why does the world measure your worth in coins and bills? At night, I would lie in bed, staring at the cracks in the ceiling, and my heart would ache in ways I couldn't explain. Not just because of the things we had lost, but because of the people we had lost along with them. That was my first taste of cruelty. It was bitter. It was sharp. And it left scars on my soul that I knew would never truly fade. And life kept teaching me lessons I never asked for. There was a time when my biggest worries were about exams, or whether my dress looked pretty enough for a birthday party. But now, my biggest worry was whether we would have enough food for the night. I still remember the first evening when our kitchen went silent. The shelves that once overflowed with groceries now stood almost empty, their hollowness echoing through the house. My mother tried to smile, serving whatever little was left on our plates, but her eyes betrayed the truth. She was breaking inside. Hunger became a quiet visitor in our home. It didn't knock. It didn't announce itself. It just slipped in and stayed. And slowly, it stole the energy from our bodies, the light from our faces, and the dreams from our hearts. I began skipping meals so my younger brother could eat. I would lie to my mother, saying, "I'm not hungry today," even though my stomach screamed otherwise. At night, the pain of emptiness would curl inside me. But I bit my lip and stayed silent, because I couldn't bear to add to my parents' worries. School became harder too, not just because of the whispers behind my back, but because I couldn't focus anymore. How do you study algebra when your stomach is empty? How do you memorize history when your mind is busy wondering if there will be bread on the table tomorrow? I began to understand something cruel. Poverty doesn't just steal money. It steals time. It steals health. It steals dreams. It takes away the simple joy of being young and replaces it with a heaviness that feels too big to carry. Every night, as I closed my eyes, I prayed, not for toys, not for clothes, not for gifts, just for food, for one simple meal that could fill my family's stomachs and give us the strength to face another day. That was when I realized hunger doesn't just live in your body. It lives in your heart too, gnawing at your hope, until even hope begins to feel hungry. And if hunger had already broken parts of me, then what happened next shattered me completely. It was the morning I'll never forget. The sky outside was heavy with clouds, as if it knew what was coming. My father, who had been fighting silently for months, trying to hold our family together, suddenly collapsed. We rushed him to the hospital, our hearts pounding, our hands trembling. But poverty followed us even there. The doctors spoke in terms of money first and life second. They said he needed urgent treatment, medicine care. But all of it came with a price tag we could no longer afford. I stood there, frozen, as my mother begged them to help. Her voice breaking, her tears falling freely. But rules were rules, and hearts of stone don't melt for tears. That day, I realized something even darker than hunger. The world doesn't just abandon the poor. Sometimes it lets them die. We managed to get a little treatment, thanks to a kind stranger who paid a small amount. But it wasn't enough. My father lay there on the hospital bed, weak and pale, his eyes searching mine with a mixture of love and sorrow. "Rose," he whispered, his voice barely audible. "Be strong. Life is cruel, but you must not let it take your soul." I nodded, but inside, I was breaking into a million pieces. Because how could I be strong when the man who was my shield, my comfort, my everything, was slipping away before my eyes? And then, the moment came. The monitors beeped one last time, and silence filled the room. A silence so loud it drowned my heartbeats. That was the day my world collapsed. Not because we were poor, not because people treated us badly, but because I had lost the person who made every hardship bearable. From that day on, life was no longer about living. It became about surviving. And I wasn't sure if I had the strength left to do even that. And after my father's death, life became a shadow of what it once was. The house that used to echo with laughter now echoed with silence. Every corner reminded me of him. The chair where he read the newspaper. The shoes by the door that would never be worn again. The soft hum of his favorite song that I would never hear. At first, people came with words of comfort. They said things like, "Stay strong," and "Time heals." But soon, the visits stopped. The sympathy faded, and we were left alone with our grief. Loneliness. It's heavier than hunger, colder than poverty, and sharper than betrayal. It wraps around you at night and whispers cruel reminders that the person you loved most is never coming back. My mother tried to be strong for us, but I could see the exhaustion in her eyes. She carried the weight of the world on her shoulders, yet people still judged her. Relatives who once smiled at us now looked at us as if we were a burden. Some whispered that poverty was our fault. Some avoided us completely, as if grief was contagious. And I withdrew into myself. I stopped talking much. I stopped laughing. I even stopped sharing my feelings with friends. Because the truth was, no one wanted to hear about the pain of a poor girl. They wanted smiles, jokes, distractions. Not tears, not sorrow, not brokenness. So I wore a mask. I walked through school pretending to be fine, even when my heart was in pieces. But every time I saw fathers picking up their daughters, or families laughing together, a sharp ache cut through me. I felt like an outsider in a world where love and stability still existed, just not for me. Loneliness became my silent companion. It sat with me at meals. It followed me to school. It even crept into my dreams. And no matter how much I tried to escape it, I couldn't. Because loneliness wasn't just around me. It was inside me. That was when I realized, you don't need to be completely alone to feel lonely. You just need to lose the one person who made you feel whole. And if loneliness was painful, then the cruelty of people made it unbearable. You see, when you're poor, your struggles don't stay hidden. People see them. They smell them. They sense them. And instead of helping, Many use them as weapons against you. I still remember walking into school after my father's death. My uniform wasn't as clean anymore. My shoes had started wearing out, and my lunchbox was often empty. The same classmates who once wanted to sit with me now avoided me. Some whispered, some giggled, some looked at me with pity, which was worse than hatred. Teachers who once praised me for my good grades now seemed impatient with me. If I didn't have a notebook, if I couldn't afford a school project, I was scolded in front of everyone. The world that once smiled at me was now pointing fingers. But the hardest part was outside the school. Relatives who once came to our home for dinners now barely acknowledged us. When my mother asked for small help, doors were shut. And when she worked long hours just to buy food, people called her desperate behind her back. I kept thinking, where did all the love go? Where were all those people who once claimed to care? Did money buy their affection? And when our money was gone, did their love vanish with it? The world turned colder every day. Smiles were no longer genuine. Words no longer kind. It felt like we were invisible, except when people wanted to judge us. And yet, somehow I kept going. Not because I was strong, but because I had no choice. I learned to walk through the coldness, to carry my wounds silently, to pretend I wasn't breaking inside. But at night, when the world was quiet, the truth would hit me all over again. I was a girl who had lost everything, living in a world that had no space for the broken. And after losing love, losing wealth, and facing the coldness of the world, I thought I would never survive. But then, something began to change within me. It wasn't sudden. It wasn't loud. It was quiet, like a small flame flickering in the dark. At first, I didn't notice it. I was too consumed by grief and shame. But little by little, I realized that no matter how harsh the world was, I was still standing. I was still breathing. I was still here. Maybe I wasn't smiling the way I used to. Maybe my dreams were shattered. But I hadn't given up. And that was strength. Strength doesn't always roar. Sometimes it whispers, just try one more day. Sometimes it shows up when you get out of bed, even though your heart is heavy. Sometimes it hides in your tears, reminding you that crying doesn't make you weak. It makes you human. I began to notice my mother's sacrifices more clearly. Her tired hands, her weary eyes, her soft prayers at night, when she thought no one was listening. She was breaking too, but she never let us see it. She carried her pain with grace. And watching her, I realized something. If she could keep going, so could I. I started studying harder, not because I wanted to prove myself to others, but because I wanted to prove to myself that I was more than my pain. I began to dream again. Small dreams at first, like finishing school, helping my mother, becoming independent. The world was still cold. People were still cruel. But inside me, there was a strength that no one could take away. It was silent. It was fragile. But it was real. And that strength whispered to me every night, "Rose, your story isn't over yet. This is just the beginning of who you're meant to be." And for the longest time, I thought my story was only about loss. Losing money, losing friends, losing love, losing the version of me who once believed life was beautiful. But slowly, as days turned into months, something new began to bloom inside me. It wasn't wealth. It wasn't luxury. It wasn't the easy happiness I once had. It was something deeper, something that no storm could steal. Hope. It came softly, in the way my mother's laughter returned one evening, when I made her tea just the way she liked it, in the way a kind stranger offered me a seat on the bus, when I was tired, in the way I realized that even though I had lost almost everything, I still had myself. I still had my heart, and my heart was still capable of love. I stopped waiting for the world to be kind to me. I learned to be kind to myself. I stopped searching for people to lift me up. I began lifting myself, and with every small step forward, it felt like the night inside me was ending. The darkness that once swallowed me whole was breaking apart, and in its place, a new dawn was rising. I won't lie and say life became perfect. No, life was still hard, but I wasn't the same Rose anymore. The girl who once thought her worth was tied to money and status was gone. The girl who now stood here knew that even without wealth, she carried something priceless, a heart that survived, a spirit that refused to break, and a strength that was born from pain. And maybe, just maybe, this was the real beginning of my story. Not the part where I was rich, not the part where I lost everything, but the part where I discovered who I truly was. The sun rose in the sky that morning, and I whispered to myself, Rose, your life is not over. It's only just begun. And just when I thought my struggles were softening, life reminded me again that pain comes in waves. I had begun to find peace within myself, but the world? It wasn't ready to let me rest. One day, I met some of my old friends, the same people who once laughed with me at expensive cafes, the ones who once praised me when I wore beautiful dresses. When they saw me now, wearing simple clothes, carrying a second-hand bag, their eyes changed. Their smiles were fake, their words sharp. Rose, is this really you? Life hasn't been kind to you, has it? They didn't say it with kindness. They said it with pity, with mockery. For a moment, their words pierced through my heart. I wanted to run, to hide, to cry. But then I remembered something. I wasn't the same fragile Rose anymore. So I stood there, looked them in the eye, and with the softest but strongest voice I could gather, I said, Yes, this is me. Life may not have been kind, but I'm still standing, and that is more powerful than anything money ever gave me. They fell silent. Maybe they didn't understand. Maybe they never would. But in that moment, I realized that their opinion no longer defined me. The old Rose lived for others' validation. The new Rose was learning to live for herself. That night, I cried again. But these tears weren't from weakness. They were from strength, from knowing that even when the world tried to break me, I had finally learned how to bend without shattering. And after all the storms, I thought I would never bloom again. But here I was, proving myself wrong. Slowly, opportunities began to find me. I started tutoring younger kids in my neighborhood. At first, it was just for a little income. But soon, it became my passion. Their innocent smiles, their eagerness to learn, their small thank yous, they healed me in ways I didn't expect. For the first time in years, I felt needed. I felt useful. I felt alive. And with every child I helped, I realized something powerful. Maybe my fall from riches wasn't a punishment. Maybe it was a redirection, a way for me to discover a part of myself that I never knew existed. The girl who once lived in mansions now found her joy in small classrooms. The girl who once measured happiness in money now measured it in moments. And as I watched the sun set one evening, a smile appeared on my face. Not the fake smile I used to wear for the world, but a real one. Born from scars, born from survival, born from growth. I finally understood. I wasn't just Rose, the girl who lost everything. I was Rose, the flower that bloomed again, even after being crushed. And maybe, just maybe, this was the most beautiful version of me that had ever existed.